Coming up on Chasing the Natty, we are concluding our deep dive into the biggest coaching changes of the 2026 offseason, and this week we're going to be diving into the often hard to decipher, but sometimes even more critical group of six systems. We'll be discussing coaches coming up from the FCS, big-time coordinators getting their shot as the head man of their own programs, as well as some long-time Group of Five staple coaches getting themselves a change of scenery. We've got all of that and more coming right after this.
Looking to throw. Caught. Tony off and running. He doesn't lose foot races. Touchdown Miami.
Jackson going to the end zone. What a night both Sparks. Make it 4.
Shakes through a couple of tacklers. Still on his feet. Hawkins to the end zone. Unbelievable.
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. All right, welcome in everyone. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing the Natty podcast. Hope you guys are having a wonderful ride to your work on this Tuesday morning. We are the College Fantasy Football Podcast on the Campus to Canton Podcast Network. You can find us in all of your podcast feeds and on YouTube every Monday morning during the off season at 6 a.m. sharp. If you want to support the great work we do here, head on over to campustocanton.com. Subscribe there with any of our phenomenal tiers. We got content ranging on all sorts of college football games, whether that is CFF, Devy, C2C, College IDP, Underdog Best Balls. If you play it, we've got content, whether that's tools, rankings, pretty much everything you need to succeed. In fact, right now you can go ahead and find my CFF rankings over at Campus to Canton. Those are now up. You can also find our ADP for this upcoming season up and ready to go, as well as our draft predictor tool is also up and running. So tons of great tools. Go check it out over there. All you need is the lowest tier for all of that. And again, make sure you use that promo code NATTY, N-A-T-T-Y, to get 10% off your yearly membership if you want to access all those cool things. If you can't do that, just show us some love by leaving a like, a comment, and subscribe on the YouTube side of things. On the podcast side of things, just leave a 5-star review. Make sure you're following the show. Not only does that show us support, but also the entire game of college fantasy football in general, a ton of support. If you have any further questions or want to get in touch for whatever reason, you can find me in the show on Twitter. I'm at CFF_Jared. The show is at Chasing the Natty, and the handsome fellow sitting across from me in Saints and Ohio State gear today. I'm curious to see what the theme of the day led to that. But it is Mr. Chris Battistel at FFChrisB on Twitter. Chris, man, explain the choice of outfit today. Was it just roll of the dice, picked it out of the closet, or is there a theme going on here?
Well, it is NFL free agency, so I had to rep my boys, the New Orleans Saints. And I mean, like I mentioned before, I've got team gear from a bunch of teams across college football, because like I don't have a school that I attended. I'm not part of, I've never lived in any of the states. So I have the ability and the joy to just wear what I want. I got an Ohio State hat on. I got a Wake Forest Demon Deacons run the damn ball t-shirt on. Now I don't get too frivolous. I would never wear, Alabama shirt and a Georgia hat, or an LSU shirt and an Oklahoma hat. I know my limits and I play within it. So that's pretty much it. But before we touch on these coaches, I just want to say to everyone watching out there or listening, throw an F in the chat for my man, Jared, because Jared, I assume because you're a Georgia fan, you're also a Falcons fan. And I've never watched a Marvel movie, but social media has kind of helped me understand what Infinity Stones are. And it seems like the Atlanta Falcons are collecting the oft-injured quarterbacks as each and every one of their Infinity Stones, because they just picked up your guy, Tua Tagovailoa. How do you feel about that, Jared?
I definitely sent a lot of bruh texts out today when I saw that, but I did say that we did need to sign a quarterback because I don't care what they say about Penix being back by spring. I don't think that's going to happen, and I really doubt.
I don't think so
either.
I
wouldn't be surprised if he misses some games to start the season. So I kept saying we need to sign another quarterback. I was kind of hoping maybe we go after Kyler, but he's going to want somewhere he's going to get the chance to start, and not have somebody breathing over his neck, at least not midway through the season, right?
Maybe physically breathing over.
Yeah, they might be physically breathing over his neck.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean he's injured all the time, but like he's dirt cheap, right? Like he is
Sure.
absolutely
Yeah.
dirt cheap right now because Miami's paying a whole bunch of money. He doesn't need a big
Tons of dough.
contract wherever he's going. So we just sign him for cheap for 1 year. If he stays healthy, it might end up being a really good signing. But that's the real big question.
If.
That's a giant if, right?
If.
That's a giant if, and let's see. Who even knows if he can see straight at this point? But once I saw like how much we were kind of paying him, I was like, okay, I don't hate this. It's another body.
Yeah.
We'll see how long that body lasts, but I it's very memeable. It's a very memeable signing, but I as I thought about it throughout the day, I'm like, I don't hate it as much as I thought I was going to. Now, would I be upset if we signed another quarterback just in case? No. But nah,
step one is acceptance, Jared. So you've already nailed step one.
That's like step 5, brother.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, no, yes.
So you've gone through grieving and everything else, and now you're in acceptance. So step 5, you're good to go.
Oh yeah, no, I've been through all of them. So, all right. What we don't have to grieve about though is researching these group of 5 coaching changes. Man, Power 4 is already kind of tough in terms of like trying to track down, making sure you're covering every offensive coordinator change and stuff like that. Group of 5 is even harder. I forgot to write down the website, but there was a website that I found that listed every offensive coordinator change in the country. I'll have to see if I can find that real quick in our Slack because I sent it to all you guys when I found it because I'm like, holy crap, this is like perfect.
Right.
Yep. And I went too far back. I'm just going to end up wasting time with this because we got a lot to cover. Because, man, researching these G5 coordinator changes and everything, this is, in my opinion, one of the more fun pieces of off-season research because this is the stuff that's not readily apparent, readily available, right? Yeah. Coaching changes is something that a lot of people don't really take the time to look at themselves, let alone these, group of 6 guys. And man, the more I dove into it, the more I was going back to my rankings and be like, all right, I gotta bump this guy up a little bit because this is actually a way better system for him than I thought. Finding out about some of these coordinators coming up from the FCS level, figuring out the systems they tried to run there. Are they going to be successful at the group of 5 level? So I guess I'll ask you, Chris, how was your research experience for these group of 5 coaches?
It was fun. It was fun trying to figure out, going back in history to try to determine who was the player that you want to pinpoint in some of these offenses. And then you had some of these, coaching staffs that have moved from the P4 down to the G5, same as FCS and up. So it's going to be interesting to see how some of these new, first round head coaches kind of work out in the systems that they're running. Like Brian Hartline, one of the top coaches that we're going to touch on here. Oh, yeah. It's going to be very, very an interesting cycle to see how much of his recruiting prowess he brings to USF and how much of the game plan that he kind of like, I wouldn't say he was too involved in at Ohio State, but it's seeing just how much he brings some of that to USF as well. So I'm excited. I'm excited to dive in, Jared.
By the way, it is footballscoop.com that has a FBS offensive coordinator tracker, and they did themselves a pretty solid job there. So that's what I use like is basically as my checklist coming through this, making sure I just didn't, because head coaches are relatively easy to find. Like when a new head coach changes, you just kind of go through every program. And you're like, all right, who do I remember making a big head coaching hire? Offensive coordinators are a little bit harder to track down sometimes. These guys made it real easy, including the fact that we'll discuss in honorable mentions. I had no clue that Rick Bowie moved on from Western Kentucky. That was a surprise to me. I was like, oh, did not realize that Western Kentucky now has their 6 new offensive coordinator in a row. Like those guys churn out offensive coordinators like you wouldn't believe. Anyway, let's get to it. We'll go ahead and talk about our first guy here, Chris. You already mentioned him. We got to talk about Brian Hartline. This was a guy that I really was waiting for years. I really thought, I'm kind of surprised he took the head coaching job at South Florida because I thought he was waiting for a bigger opportunity. He's one of the most talked about recruiters in the entire country, and the way his name would come up and be talked about for big jobs. Like, I mean, wasn't he talked about for Penn State at one point?
Yep.
But he does land one of the bigger group of 5 or group of 6 now, I guess I should say, head coaching jobs here. Going to South Florida, coming off of Alex Golish, it seems like they're ready to continue with the offensive identity. Brian Hartline, again, has been the offensive coordinator at Ohio State this past year, and then 2 years ago in 2023. And that's kind of where I started with this, was a lot of people just chalk up the Ohio State offense to just Ryan Day's offense. And, well, for the most part, I definitely think that's true. I think Brian Hartline was promoted to be the offensive coordinator and basically told by Brian Hartline, hey, just make sure we continue to do what we do. Because not much changed when Brian Hartline became the offensive coordinator, at least compared to what Kevin Wilson was doing before him, right? But I do think it is still interesting to kind of look at what Brian Hartline did during those times. I mean, obviously last year in 2025, a pretty good offense, 36th in the country in overall yards per game. The rushing definitely lacked somewhat. I mean, they were relying on a true freshman running back, as good as Bo Jackson was.
Yep.
That's not something you really see for a program with the caliber of Ohio State. So it makes sense that the rushing offense was, a little pedestrian comparatively, but the passing offense was as good as ever, still top 30 in the country. That's really good, especially for a team that's not really an air raid team. And that's what we've seen with Brian Hartline in both years that he was a coordinator. You have pocket passing quarterbacks like Kyle McCord and Julian Sayin. Not saying that Hartline can't work with a dual threat quarterback, but that does seem to kind of be what he has worked with, and it makes sense given, Michael Van Buren's coming in. He's a relatively immobile quarterback, so it makes sense that that's the kind of guy you'd be looking for. And the other thing that really kind of stood out to me was, compared to like Chip Kelly and even to Kevin Wilson, Brian Hartline was more okay with not really a workhorse back. Like, we're not talking about 200 plus carries here, but we are talking about a guy that's clearly the lead back compared to the rest. Like, Bo Jackson had 178 carries compared to CJ Donaldson's 96, right? Back in 2023, Travion Henderson had 70 more carries than Chip Trayanum. Now, granted, I don't know what Hartline would have done if he had the talent that was Quinshon Judkins in the same backfield as Travion Henderson. It could very well be just a talent issue, right? I could be drawing too much from this, but it is something I noted. Same thing with the wide receiver, right? His top wide receivers have averaged 106 targets in his 2 seasons as offensive coordinator. That's great.
Terrific.
But those 2 names were Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jeremiah Smith. So those are pretty dang good wide receivers. I don't know about you, Chris. Those are guys that if you have on campus, you're throwing to 100 times. So I don't really know how much I could take away from that, because I don't know if he has that dude on his roster. We can discuss that here in a second about the guys we're looking at here. So, again, I lost my train of thought. Let's get back on track here, Jared. Like I said, if we take this at face value, that he does kind of have a top running back, a top wide receiver, that leaves the question, who do we go after, right? Quarterback, I think, is pretty simple. I think it's going to be Michael Van Buren. I've got him projected all right, but not great. I got him at about just under 2,800 yards passing, 21 touchdowns, a little bit of running here, about 50 rush attempts, 185 yards, and about 3-4 touchdowns. That's about QB 78 with a confidence discount, QB 58 if I didn't have any confidence discount on him whatsoever. So not great, but a guy that you can spot start in certain weeks, right? Especially in the American Athletic, he could be pretty solid. I'm more interested in the running back and the wide receiver, right? DJ Crowther, we talked about it before. That's my guy I'm picking out of this backfield. He comes up from the FCS from Dartmouth. He was a workhorse back there. I think he's got the experience to come in here. He should be pretty good in the American Athletic. I've got him projected pretty well. Again, the RB1 for Brian Hartline, his 2 years as offensive coordinators, is average about 175 rush attempts. Again, not a workhorse, but with a efficient guy, you can potentially clear 1,000 yards on just 175 rush attempts there. And I think that Crowther, if he lives up to, or if he translates well here, I think he could get there. So I'm interested in Crowther. And then wide receiver is more interesting to me because I don't know which way to go here, right? You're bringing in Kenny Odom. Kenny Odom, 100 target guy at UTEP last year. Very inefficient, though, only 9.5 yards per catch. He was extremely efficient the year before at 16.1 yards per catch. So hopefully maybe he kind of gets back onto it. But he's also a slot wide receiver, and the top wide receivers for Heartline in his 2 years were both outside guys in Smith and Harrison Jr. Yeah. But again, is that a talent thing? Right. Then you got Bryson Rogers, limited action at Ohio State, former 4-star recruit 3 years ago. But he's following Heartline here, so there's clearly a connection there. And then you have the home guy here, the guy they retained from last year, Mudia Rubin, who did not do much at Stanford for years. Started to come out a little bit last year, right, for South Florida. About just under 500 yards, 5 touchdowns. Could they reward the guy that stuck around? He is another guy who is... Actually, no, he played... Okay, he's interesting. He's played both outside and slot over the years. So I could see them moving him back outside potentially. So between those 3 guys, I think all 3 of them are worth taking shots on. I think Kenny Odom is the one I've seen drafted the most consistently. But Chris, I've been rambling a lot here. What are your thoughts on this kind of system? And just really, I think the wide receiver position, who would you go after there?
Yeah, Hartline is the kind of coach who can make the usage get top heavy fast, like you mentioned with his running backs, with the outside wide receiver. That's where I'm gonna pinpoint the at least early usage out of this offense. You hit the nail on the head there. I'm starting to lean a little bit more towards DJ Crowther than I am Chase Garnett, just because of the usage that he's already had. He's a known commodity. Yes, he's coming up from the FCS to the FBS, but he's not moving up to the Power 4. He's coming up to the G5. So there's opportunity there for Crowther to be the lead back for this offense. What this lead back role is gonna produce is gonna be, we're gonna have to wait to see what that is. But for me, yeah, it's pick the outside wide receiver. Again, he doesn't have a Jeremiah Smith, doesn't have a Marvin Harrison Jr. So as we move into spring and we gather a little bit more information on who the standout is going to be, for now, I'm okay taking Kenny Odom. I'm okay. I've seen Bryson Rogers go in almost every draft as well. So that's where I'm going to hitch my fantasy wagon into this offense. The outside wide receiver 1 and the early named RB1 for this team, Jared. Nailed it.
I am leaning towards Rodgers as of right now, mostly just kind of playing on the whole big fish, small pond kind of deal, even though, again, he hasn't done much at Ohio State. He is following Heartline there. He is playing that outside role, so maybe this is the time for him to kind of step up here. That is the position that projects a little bit better. I project him at 90 targets versus, I think, Kenny Odom I have at 75 targets. That's what slot receivers have averaged under Brian Hartline last 2 years. Granted, last year, the top 2 receivers were Smith and Tate, so they are heavily pushing to the outside. So maybe I need to consider it more rather than the slot wide receiver, I should do it as a wide receiver 2. Maybe I'll reconsider that later. But as of right now, Rodgers does project out a little bit better for me than Kenny Odom. And so if I'm going to take a shot on one of them, I think I go that direction. But I wholeheartedly agree with you. We got to pay attention to spring notes here.
Yeah, absolutely. I found it interesting with the known commodity that Heartline is with the wide receivers. Like how many of that position from USF left? Like I know a lot of them followed Golish to Auburn, but I thought we'd get a little bit more players staying behind because of who was named head coach there at USF. But
I think I'm less surprised by that because the veer and shoot system attracts very particular athletes.
Sure. Yeah, I guess.
Right. So. Versus like Heartline's coming in with a much more pro style system here. What I'm shocked by is that Heartline didn't land any kind of big time wide receiver out of the portal. I think that's kind of the bigger shock comparatively. Right, because again, the best ones we're looking at here are Kenny Odom and Bryson Rogers, which again, don't get me wrong, I'm sure they'll perform well, but I would have thought that with the recruiting pedigree that Brian Hartline has, he would have convinced at least one big-time name to come down there to South Florida, especially with so many of these guys coming out of South Florida. You would think that, he would be able to convince at least one of them to kind of come home. So that's just kind of that's kind of my thought on that. So, all right, let's move on to our second guy. Chris, you lead us on this one. Let's talk about Neil Brown, the former head coach of West Virginia in 2024, headed over now to become the head coach of North Texas, replacing Eric Morris in the fantastic season that they've had the last couple of years. The last season at West Virginia wasn't the greatest, Chris, but what can we expect from Neil Brown as he enters with the Mean Green here?
With Neil Brown, for me, the place to begin with at North Texas is the backfield. North Texas is going through too much turnover to treat this like a carryover offense. Of course, we've already talked about the prior coaching staff moving up to Oklahoma State and Eric Morris, and a lot of the players following him with that. So the first role I care about is the one most likely to become stable the quickest. That is the running back, and that is Jaheim White. White has already spent time with Neil Brown at West Virginia, and during that time, he put up 1,830 all-purpose yards. So there was already a coach-player familiarity there. Jaheim White has flashed explosiveness, but he's never really gotten that full bell cow season that we want from a running back position, especially when we're taking them early. But that opening might finally be there now at UNT. The receiver room is a lot harder to kind of trust or predict or pinpoint one of the guys that steps out of this offense to be a stud for fantasy. Brown's history does not tend to create a fantasy stud wideout. Only 2 receivers during his time at West Virginia put up over 100 targets. And then there was no clear trend on which receiver you wanted to target, whether that was the slot wide receiver or the primary boundary wide receiver. It was kind of a mixed bag year after year as to which wide receiver was getting the bulk of those targets. So it's hard to force a wide receiver 1 projection, at least this early. If there was one name worth watching, maybe it's Corey Milliner, maybe. But again, I'm not projecting too much output from him, at least at the start of the season, until we see how this offense grows. If I'm drafting this offense today, Jared, I'm buying the Jaheim White workload path and letting the receiver room prove itself later as we move deeper into the process, man.
I'm actually not buying into Jaheim White right now
At all?
No, I haven't drafted him once in all the
at the
drafts.
price, or just
Mostly at the price.
high?
Like I have him as my RB41 in my rankings, and he's currently going as RB24 in drafts. Right? Can't do
That's
that.
a little bit rich, yeah. That's a little bit rich.
I think that people really need to remember that this man's coming off of a torn ACL, which is pretty. Again, obviously, guys recover from these ACLs much better than they have in the past.
That's like a sprained finger now. Jared.
Yes,
you get over that pretty quickly.
but
yeah,
that first year back from an ACL, guys don't really look the same, right? It's usually the second year afterwards that they're back, right? It used to be a career-ending thing. Now, again, by the time the second year comes around, they'll be fine. White is still in that first year, though. He is going down to North Texas. He is going to lower competition. That's why I don't have a higher confidence discount on him than I probably should if I'm just taking it at face value of transferring and also, coming off of a torn ACL. I don't even have him as high of a discount as I normally would give a guy like that. But that still puts him at RB41. I can't buy that right now. But I do agree with you that if there's a position that feels the safest, that might be it. But what I am buying into is the quarterback position. Garrett Green was a top 12 quarterback in 2023, a top 36 quarterback, even in a bad offense in 2024. When Neil Brown's got a dual threat quarterback, he can work with some guys here. So I look at a guy like Taven Jackson who's coming in. You also got redshirt freshman Chris Jimerson, who stuck around through the coaching change, didn't follow Eric Morris or Jordan Davis to East Carolina. He's sticking around at North Texas there. I think whoever wins that job could be pretty interesting. Jackson's been rough the last couple of years, but, if you grab him as your 5th or 6th quarterback in drafts, I think there's pretty solid upside there. Like, my projections say he should score about 10 plus touchdowns on the ground because of how much Neil Brown's willing to run his quarterbacks. So we will definitely see there. And then I fully agree with you on the wide receivers. Like, I just looked so deep into his history, both at West Virginia and, I believe Houston before that. Was it Houston before that? Yes, it was. And I just don't see any wide receivers you'd be happy with, just straight up. Like, yes, some of them got the targets, but the efficiency wasn't there to really pay that off, right? The Corey Milner drafters, I'm sorry. You're not drafting him at a super high price, but my projections currently have him at 70 targets, about 41 catches, 657 yards, and 6 touchdowns. So maybe you get a spike.
Numbers.
Maybe you get a spike game here or there, but for the most part, I think you're going to be relatively disappointed. Now, you can argue me that Milner is just a clearly better wide receiver than most of the other guys on that team, and I'm willing to listen to that because that does change how coaches, divvy up their targets compared to the past. But given the fact that there's almost no history here of peppering a guy and him getting a ton of efficiency, I wouldn't be super confident in that. So,
yep, that's pretty. Just out of curiosity, what do you have for Taven Jackson's rushing totals? Because I was looking him up and I don't see him as this at least decent rushing quarterback just based on, box score numbers and just trying to look at his statistics. So I'm just interested to see what you have him at there.
All right, yeah, let me look that up real quick. Again, I don't have Taven Jackson ranked super high in my rankings. I got him at QB 70. Like I said, you grab him as your 5th, 6th
QB5,
quarterback.
QB6.
You're good to go. But rushing totals, I've got him at about 600 yards. Now you can say that might be a little rich there, and I don't fully blame you because if I just did his if I did projections just on the player himself, we're down to about 400, right? This is assuming that, again, level or better competition for him to face against. Also assumes that Neil Brown is, in fact, going to run him. I do have him projected for 120 rush attempts because that's what Garrett Green was getting in those last couple of years. Maybe that's a little rich, right?
That's Scrooge McDuck doing backstrokes in the coin pool, Rich Jared. That's how rich that is.
No, I don't blame you. But yeah. So, but again, like, I have a huge confidence discount on him for a reason, right? Because again, I don't know exactly how Neil Brown's going to use him. I think he's mobile. I think he can use his legs a little bit. And I think he's just had some rough goes in the last couple of years. But again, there's a reason why he's down at QB 70. So
yeah, he's gonna give you boom weeks. He's gonna give you those weeks where if he's you're playing best ball, he's gonna give you that 1 or 2 weeks where he's the top scorer at the position on your team for sure. Because, like you mentioned, because of the system. But I'm just not overly optimistic on his rushing totals. I think 42 attempts is his career high. 7 fumbles. He averages 2.6 yards per carry through his career. So I'm not overly optimistic on having at least that giant rush total for Taven Jackson going into this season at UNT.
Nope. Like I said, don't fully blame you. But if you're not confident in Taven Jackson, you're really not going to be confident in this next coach we got to talk about here, and that is Will Hall, the former passing game coordinator at Tulane, promoted to head coach with John Summerall moving on. But more importantly, Will Hall was the head coach of Southern Miss in the couple years prior. And boy, if you look at the offensive rankings and fantasy finishes for his top offensive weapons up on the screen right now, I don't blame you whatsoever for saying, Jesus Christe, Tulane, what are you doing? Or Jared, what are we doing even talking about this? Because, boy, this is not good. His last year at Southern Miss, 129th in overall offense, 119th in passing offense, 116th in rushing offense. Top quarterback was QB 188. Might I remind everybody, there are only 136 starting quarterbacks in the country. there were backups. There was like 50 more backups that were scoring more than Will Hall's top quarterback. RB1 was RB1, or his RB1 was RB150 on the year in 2024. His wide receiver 1 was wide receiver 436 in the season. That offense was putrid, and I hate to say it, as much as that last year was just an abject disaster, the years before weren't really that much better. He never had an offense over 90th as head coach of Southern Miss. But you know what he did have? You know what he did have, Chris? He had Frank Gore Jr. Frank Gore Jr. was fun. Right? Frank Gore Jr. in his 2 years under Will Hall, 229 carries, 1,119 yards and 10 touchdowns. His final year, the year before that, 228 carries, 1,378 yards, and 9 touchdowns that season. Will Hall may not be good for anything, but if he has a number one back, he has a star running back, he's going to ride him. And given Jamari McClure's emergence down the stretch last season, I pray to God Will Hall is smart enough to do that again. We talk about my projections here. My projections for McClure are kind of insane. Like, if you combine the insane efficiency McClure has had over the last couple of years, his 6.7 yards per carry and the like, with the average volume that Frank Gore was getting his final 2 years, you're talking about 1,513 total yards and 9 touchdowns. That's RB22 with a slight confidence discount on him in my rankings. Without that confidence discount, he's RB14. Tulane's been a pretty good program the last couple of years.
Yep.
I'm hoping that they wouldn't promote Hall here if they didn't think he'd be able to continue that. Basically, it's like he couldn't build a program himself, but maybe he's able to kind of keep things going here at Tulane. At least I hope so, because if that's the case, Jamar McClure is an easy pick in most drafts. I would avoid the quarterback position. I mean, Zion Chris might be a little fun. He is dual threat, right? But Hall was not able to do much with the dual threat quarterbacks he had at Southern Miss. And then wide receiver, just completely forget about it. Chris, do you see this? Do you see the system as the same?
Yeah, I see it. I see it as the same. Really comes down to whether Hall gives the right back the right workload, and really that's shaping up to be Jamari McClure here. That's the hinge point. His efficiency has already been shown enough to make him a very interesting candidate for a high workload. So it's just a bet on whether McClure gets the feature back treatment that we've seen Will Hall give to running backs that are capable of it, like you mentioned with Frank Gore Jr. So I'm high on Jamari McClure. He's being drafted high. You're pretty high on him as well. So that's going to be it for me for Tulane. Are you targeting the quarterback at all? Is there a quarterback in this room that you're ready to draft?
No, I just mentioned it. Like Zion Chris, I'm slightly interested because I'm just interested in any dual threat quarterback that is going to be in a conference like the American Athletic, like Big 12, Pac-12, like any of these conferences where defense is somewhat optional. Dual threat quarterbacks can be fun for you. But even when I plugged him in, right, Zion Chris is my QB 89 right now. Just overall, nothing super impressive here. About 2,100 yards, 12 touchdowns passing. Got some rushing, 600 yards on the ground and 5 touchdowns. So like I said, that'll provide you some solid boom weeks here and there. But in terms of a guy that I want to rely on, probably not. So, and like I said, wide receiver, absolutely not. Just not even touching it here. Especially with Zion Chris as quarterback. Like, there's just nothing, like, in some systems, all the puzzle pieces are coming together for great things to happen. Not quite the case going on here with Tulane outside of Jamari McClure. So,
yeah.
All right, Chris, let's talk about our next one here, and that is Charles Huff. At his second program in as many years, he is formerly the head coach of Southern Miss, now headed over to Memphis, taking over for Ryan Silverfield, who left for Arkansas. We covered him last week, so go check out that. He also brings with him Kevin Decker, the former offensive coordinator out of Old Dominion, over here to be the offensive coordinator. between these two guys taking over the Tigers here, Chris, what can we expect coming into the 2026 season?
I think it's fair to say, Jared, that Charles Huff is the Lane Kiffin of the G5. Is that fair to say? I mean, just as much
Elaborate,
coverage.
please. That's not what I
Well,
expected to
just
come out
with
of your mouth.
all the drama and everything, and not necessarily
Oh,
coaching
okay.
scheme, but
Okay, I was
bouncing around and
I
all that
gotcha.
stuff.
I'm
So
picking up
yeah.
what you're putting down now. I gotcha. I gotcha.
Yeah. So I would say maybe just a little bit. I mean, not as glorified as Lane Kiffin's was with that whole situation, but the way he went to from Marshall to Southern Miss for a year, and now he's going to Memphis. It just seems like he's chasing a P4 job, and this might be his best bet to get that. So I'm not even sure how long he's going to be at Memphis. If not, if it's just for this year alone. But as for the offense and for fantasy, I'm not looking for the first star. I'm looking for the first useful piece. And I still haven't been able to pinpoint that in this offense. There's been just, again, a ton of turnover at Memphis. He has brought wide receiver Tyshawn Chapman with him, who was with him at Marshall, followed him to Southern Miss, and now has gone over to Memphis. He was never a huge producer, though, so he's not a fantasy target that I'm going to be clamoring to get onto my fantasy teams. But he brings some commonality, not really with Kevin Decker, but more with Charles Huff, with the terminology, the structure, and maybe some of the expectations that Huff is going to have for his wide receiver room moving into the 2026 season. That can matter a lot in a room that is getting a reset like Memphis is. But one of the more interesting targets, at least transfer-wise, that I kind of want to maybe able to draft at a later value is tight end Hunter Tipton, a guy who 39 catches last year, 411 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns, spent a lot of his time as a slot kind of wide receiver for Middle Tennessee. And if he takes on that role with Memphis, if he kind of adapts to be the main slot wide receiver or main slot tight end in his case, for this offense, there could be a giant uptick in what he was able to put up last year and the usage that he could see. So with that, for me, the CFF move here is to kind of file away Tipton as the sneaky role-based bet instead of forcing on taking an early wide receiver in my drafts for this offense. So I'm not overly excited for a lot of the pieces in this offense. There might be some of that you might be able to pinpoint, Jared, that you're looking forward to. But for me, as of right now, there's not much outside of maybe the dark horse candidate tight end in Tipton, man.
Yeah, I like the Tipton call out. I did not realize that he had transferred from Middle Tennessee. That's an honest mistake on my part, and I agree with you that among the receiving options, that is probably the most interesting one here. You could go Tyshawn Chapman, but again, like you said, he's really just not been great. Like, he's been tied at the hip with Huff for the last 2 years, and his best season was this past season, and he only put up about 443 yards and 3 touchdowns. And most of that coming on very explosive plays. He only got 33 targets on the season. So maybe that, translates into him getting a bigger role this season, especially with him being with Huff for so long. But one, Huff hasn't really produced a ton of great wide receivers, and neither has Kevin Decker, which is the kind of angle I want to come at this from, right? Where I've noticed the last couple of years, Huff has been very, what's the word? Not differential, but like he's deferred the responsibility of the offense to his offensive coordinator. He is one of those head coaches that when he hires a guy to run an offense, he's going to let them run the offense. And so that means that, to me, that we got to pay attention to what Kevin Decker's been doing. And we'll start with the wide receiver because that's what we were just talking about, and also that's the easiest one to kind of throw out of the way. Look at the last couple of years at Old Dominion, even going back to Norfolk, the wide receiver position has just not been it, right? Decker's really good about spreading the ball around. If you go back to last year, like Naeem Abdul, Raheem Gladding, Trey Brown, Ja'Cory Thomas were all within 9.8 to 10.6 fantasy points per game.
Yep.
You never knew which one was going to pop off each week, if any of them popped off, and if most often than not, you're getting around 10 points from each of them, right? If you love that, cool. I like to aim higher with my wide receiver upsides.
Yeah.
But I do find some interest in the running back and quarterbacks here. Running back mostly coming from the Charles Huff side, because we do know that Huff is not afraid of good lead backs, right? Like Jeffrey Pittman was solid at times last year before he got hurt. Obviously, back during Charles Huff's years at Marshall, you had Rasheen Ali and Kalen LeBour, and granted that was more Clint Trickett. Again, kind of alluding back to the offensive coordinator really running the show there. But it does make me interested in a guy like Dallin Hayden, a former 4-star running back who's been at Ohio State, been at Colorado the last couple of years. And even though Kevin Decker is not one to really have a lead back, I do kind of wonder if Dallin Hayden can maybe overcome that. One, because there's not really a lot of depth in this backfield, at least that we know of right now. Two, again, Hayden's a former blue chip prospect. He's coming home, right? That's usually something that kind of adds to a desire to feed a certain guy. It's his last year, right? Maybe he goes out in a blaze of glory. I don't know. I don't have him ranked super high, right? But at the same time, like, if I'm at the end of a draft and he's still hanging around, I'm more than happy to take the shot there. And then quarterback, of course, you have to look at. Because look at what Colton Joseph's done the last couple of years, right? Kevin Decker is phenomenal with dual threat quarterbacks. And we discussed the potential quarterback here in Marcus Stokes during our FCS transfer episode. And while he doesn't have a ton of rushing production, he is pretty mobile around the goal line. So while I don't think he's going to have the upside of what Joseph was doing rushing, I think that Kevin Decker's going to be smart enough to be able to get him plenty of touchdowns if that's what they want to do. Now, if Aaron Nolan wins this job, I think all bets are off, because according to our 2024 freshman supplemental guide, he just does not provide much of a threat with his legs. So if you're a CFFer, you're rooting for Stokes to win this job. And I would be happy drafting Stokes as like my 5th or 6th quarterback in the drafts. I think that's where he's going for the most part. I don't think I've seen him being drafted too much. Your thoughts on anything I just said?
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you on the quarterback position because of Kevin Decker, and I'm hoping they go Stokes as well. As for the running back position, man, I'd rather take shots on some other guys, like you mentioned with the wide receivers and how you chase wide receiver potential. It's just as of right now, and we're in some of these early best ball drafts. As of right now, there's just not a guy that I'm overly excited to have in this room, where I'm drafting him as my 8th, 9th, or 10th running back, and I'm like, okay, with that group of running backs when I'm drafting, I'm trying to draft potential, high usage, high volume running backs, trying to hit on some diamonds in the rough, and I just don't see it in this room, Jared.
No. All right. We're actually going to go ahead and throw the ad break over here real quick, because we are about to enter a stretch of head coaches that basically tie one after the other into each other, because they are all replacing each other. So, Austin, give the people what they want, and then we'll be right back.
Hey guys, Austin here to talk for a brief moment about Home Field Apparel, the best place to snag clothing for all my favorite schools and teams. Whether it's tees, sweatshirts, hats, joggers, or pretty much anything in between, Home Field Apparel has retro designs with a modern twist to satisfy fans from Ohio State to Drexel to Colorado School of the Mines. Plus, it's some of the comfiest clothing that I own. Use our promo code CAMPUS2CANTON, that's campus, the number 2 Canton at checkout, for 15% off your first purchase. What's up, guys? Austin here again to let you know about our partnership with Fast Draft, a best ball and DFS platform that hosts a ton of different contests. With the season over and season-long CFF best ball behind us, I know I'm looking for new contests that can scratch my drafting itch, and I think I have found just the thing. Fast Draft has a rookie-only contest called Origins. Each draft has 8 teams in it and is 6 rounds long, And as I've mentioned earlier, you only draft incoming 2026 rookies. I know I plan on max entering this thing, and I think it's going to be a ton of fun. So head on over to Fast Draft, and when you sign up, use code C2C, that's C2C, for a deposit match up to $50. Happy drafting.
All right, we are back. Thank you, Austin. Let's move on to our next stretch of head coach hires here. And we got to start, well, not start, but continue here. But this stretch will start with Jim Mora, the former head coach of UConn, headed over to be the head coach of Colorado State. And from a pure football perspective, in my opinion, this is one of the most impressive G6 head coaching hires this offseason. I thought for sure Jim Mora, after what he did at UConn last year, was going to be headed to the Power Four. Instead, he moves on from the Huskies and goes over out west to the Colorado State Rams. And if it weren't for Eric Morris last year, we would be talking about Mora and Gordon Simmons, his offensive coordinator, being the ones to almost create that perfect CFF trifecta, right? They had a top 20 quarterback. They had the wide receiver one in Skylar Bell. They had a top 12 running back in Cameron Edwards. It was everything you wanted for CFF. But now what happens next, right?
Yeah.
All three of those guys have moved on from Jim Mora and the system. Gordon Samus, the offensive coordinator that Jim Mora had at UConn, is now off to TCU, so that's going to hurt somewhat, but they did promote their new offensive coordinator from within, so you'd have to think they're going to want to do what was working before, but I'm not so sure that they really can because of the pieces of bringing in. It's a totally different experience. Like bringing in Haas Haney at quarterback is a very different experience than Joe Fagnano. Like Joe Fagnano had 211 rushing yards total in last season. Haas Haney's capable of 211 rushing yards in a single game. Right? Completely different strategies with Haney as your quarterback, right? He's also not as refined as a passer as Fagnano. So, not only am I concerned about, them replicating the wide receiver one production because, quite frankly, I look at this wide receiver room and I want to puke. But also, Haas Haney's not really that refined of a passer, so I don't know if they're really going to be able to produce enough for that. Like I said, like wide receiver room, I don't really like what I'm looking at here. Like Tommy Maurer is the lead returning wide receiver. He averaged 11.2 yards per catch last year, just over 1 yard per route run, 4.2 yards after catch per reception. Like nothing here is impressive. He also plays slot, while Bell was kind of an outside guy last year. Again, Mora doesn't really have a type in terms of like who ends up being the main guy, but I'm just going to go off of his one major guy was an outside guy. The closest thing, though, that I think they can replicate to what they had last year is at the running back position. We talked about this during the transfer portal episode. We talked running backs. I do like Darrell Robinson reconnecting with Mora here. They played together at UConn in 2024, and Darrell Robinson looked so good in the Huskies uniform that Auburn came calling. Things didn't work out at Auburn, so now Darrell Robinson is now reconnecting here with Mora. Mora has a completely barren running back room for him to work with here. He does also bring over Mel Brown and Oliver Lundberg Coleman from UConn. I've seen some people drafting Mel Brown. I really don't think Mel Brown grows much outside of the scat back role that he has because he's 5'9", 180 pounds. I think Robinson, and if you think there's going to be a threat to Robinson, it's going to be Lundberg Coleman because, again, very similar size back there. But as much as I like Darrell Robinson in this offense and reconnecting with Mora, still probably not going to get to the same heights as Cameron Edwards did last year, mostly because, again, you got Haney competing for production and scoring, just something they didn't have to worry about with Fagnano back there. So, all that to say, I like Haas Haney because, again, it's a dual threat guy in the Mountain West. He can out-athlete most people, right?
Yep.
I like Darrell Robinson, the reconnection with Mora. I don't like any of the wide receivers. None of it based on what Mora's done in the past. More about just I like the situation and or the talent that's being brought in. Does that make sense? as much as I'm talking system here, this is actually a place where I'm betting on talent rather than the system itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me, and you're absolutely right with Haney. It changes the math on this whole offense and what this whole system is bringing to Colorado State. The rushing element boosts, of course, it boosts Haney's ceiling, but it also redistributes touchdowns away from the backs and wide receivers. So while Darrell Robinson is the back you want in this room, it's just the fact that Haney is going to siphon a lot of those scores around the goal line. So that's going to limit the amount of chances that a player like Darrell Robinson or one of the top wide receivers in this offense is going to be able to produce fantasy points. So it is a good case for the quarterback. It could be frustrating for the running back and wide receivers, at least right now, projecting them because of that cash in at the goal line for Haney. So it's going to be hard for me to trust any of the players outside of the quarterback, at least for the role players in this situation. At least trust them cleanly. And just wanted to touch on Skylar Bell because I was looking into a little bit of his usage. Yes, he was primarily the boundary wide receiver, but a lot of his production came short and middle of the field. So there was a lot of cutting across the field to make these receptions for UConn last year. So that might bode well for a player like Tommy Marr, who was traditionally the slot wide receiver for Colorado State last year. At least early, I'm okay chasing the potential production of Tommy Marr in this offense. At least right now, he's the one that I'm kind of projecting to be the wide receiver one, Jared.
I'm trying to pull it up right now, but again, my Chrome is being nice and slow today. But one thing that stuck out to me when I was doing kind of research for this room, or can't get anything loading up today. All right, tools, and where is my prospect athletic comparison tool? And
you comparing the quarterback here?
I'm comparing Skylar Bell to Tommy Maurer.
Oh,
because
okay. Yeah.
I think what people don't realize is that Skylar Bell was, if I remember correctly, one of our highest rated athletes in the country.
Oh, really?
Last year. Yeah. His star index was 93.3.
I don't even want to hear what Tommy Mars was.
Like this is the point I'm trying to make here, right? You're talking about how Bell, like a lot of his work was short and over the middle of the field, and thus he could create after the catch, right? That makes sense for a guy who's 93.3 and playing a UConn schedule. Tommy Maurer, he even comes up, he does. Star
Not
index
even in the system.
No, it's better than you think. It's a 49.5, which is like, average, right? He's an average athlete, but I do think the fact that Skylar Bell was just that much better of an athlete than most of the competition he was facing helped him out a ton. I don't think Maurer is going to have the same kind of advantage that Bell had.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I definitely don't see, 140 targets that Bell saw last year.
Well, yeah.
I don't even think I see 100 targets going tomorrow. I have it below that. So, but if I was to pinpoint a wide receiver in this offense, at least right now, that's who I would pick out. If I wanted a piece.
I'm going to keep my ear to the ground and just hear what comes out of spring, because right now I don't think I want any of these guys. So
and that's a fair point as well.
All right. With Mora off to UConn, it only makes sense to ask who is going to replace him at UConn. And well, that honor goes to one Jason Candle, a longtime staple of the MAC. He has been at Toledo for nearly a decade now. And now he's leveling up. He is headed over to UConn, which mostly plays about an American Athletic level schedule, right? And while we know we can get at least one WTF game from Candle each season where his star players just completely disappear and the offense goes kaput, for the most part, he's been pretty epic for CFF over the years. Like, we'll start with quarterback here. The last year, Tucker Gleason was kind of disappointing because he didn't run nearly as much as he did the year before. But before that, Gleason was the top 20 quarterback in fantasy points per game in 2024. DeQuan Finn, when he was healthy, was a lock for top 30 in fantasy points per game during his years that he started. And so it makes me interested in the quarterback position here, especially if we have dual threat options. And the good news is we do, right? Caleb Osborne, who was the backup quarterback for Toledo last year, got some run, and run being the opportune word because he mostly does a lot of work with his legs and he's more limited as a passer, which is kind of what we've expected out of Toledo last couple of years, but that's good enough for me. If I had full confidence in him being the starter, I'd have him as a top 15 quarterback for this year. Problem is I don't have him as full confidence of starting because UConn threw in a nice little wrinkle here with Jake Merklinger entering the picture here. We haven't gotten a ton of reps from Merklinger over the last couple of years, but he was a former 4-star quarterback coming out of high school and was described as athletic, but our tools at C2C really aren't very impressed with him. I didn't write down the numbers, but again, like I think, actually I do have the athletic comparison tool up here for Klinger. So yeah, he's got a 12.5 star index. He is 81st percentile in speed, 5.8% percentile in burst, and 3.1% percentile in agility. So again, our tools are not super impressed with him based on what they've seen so far. And a quote from our wonderful overlord, Austin Nace, I asked him about Merklinger because I'm like, hey, how much, like, I went back to our freshman supplemental guide from the year that Merklinger came out of high school because I was trying to see, like, all right, what was the rap on this guy coming out of high school? And he wasn't in our freshman supplemental guide, which shocked me because he was a top 15 quarterback for his class on 247. So I asked Austin, like, hey, what's the deal here? And a quote from Austin, at the time, his mechanics were really, really bad, and his arm velocity was legit like first percentile. Not like top 1%, bottom 1%. Austin says he could run a bit, but for Austin, he was the lowest rated Power 4 commit by a solid margin that year. So that doesn't inspire a ton of confidence, but this is him playing at UConn. I think all of the doubts we might have about him playing at the Power 4 level kind of go out the window. Maybe he's more successful here. If I start getting word that Caleb Osborne is the number one guy, I'm going after him. I will go after him aggressively.
That's fair. Yep.
Now, running back. Oh, man, running back's been great for Jason Candle. Kareem Hunt, Terry Swanson, Bryant Koback for 4 years, Penny Boone, Chip Trey Unum. In all but 2 years at Toledo, Candle has had a running back hit 900-plus yards or been on pace for it in the case of the COVID season. Right? He loves himself a number one back. So here's the problem. Who the hell is it going to be, Chris?
Does he have it? Yeah.
Because, boy, there's a lot of options here. You got Trey Cornish coming over from Central Michigan. You got Sincere Bowers coming over from West Virginia. You got Jaden Hart coming over from Syracuse, a former 3-star prospect. You got Kenjin Christian coming from Toledo, following Candle to UConn. And then you got Deshaun Reeder coming in from Northwestern. All guys that offer some level of intrigue, but also have their own warts, right?
Yep.
Because in the case, I think Cornish I'm willing to write off. Because he doesn't really have the athleticism. He wasn't super great at Central Michigan to begin with.
Yeah.
I think I'll write him
Not
up.
much targets.
Sincere Bowers comes in here as clearly, and I mean clearly, the best athlete amongst the bunch here. His star index is 87.2 over at Campus of Canton. He is 80th or better percentile in multiple metrics we have over there. That's his case to it. Now, he's also 5'10", 191 pounds, so not quite the size you would want to see for a bell cow back, but it's also a UConn schedule, so maybe that doesn't matter as much. Jaden Hart, kind of the mid all-around back, right? Like, decent athleticism, middling production at Syracuse the last couple of years, but again, maybe that changes as he moves down in competition. Kenji Christian, obviously, He has a connection with Campbell. Does that pay off for him? He's also 6'2", 207 pounds, so that's a big boy that you could potentially be shoving down people's throats at UConn. And then you got Deshaun Reeder, who was pretty solid at Northwestern last year. Just averaging 10 yards a carry for the Wildcats.
That's it.
So, but again, like, why wasn't he getting more run at Northwestern last year if he was so good? Right, so on paper, I'm not really sure there's anybody I really, really want here, but history says there will be somebody who kind of breaks away here. Chris, I'll take a break from my spiel here. What are your thoughts on this running back room?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough to. I mean, like we've harped on in a lot of these early situations. We kind of just have to wait to see how it kind of unfolds with who's going to be the number one option for this offense. You've written off Trey Cornish. I've kind of written him off as well, although he does carry maybe the more experience in this room. He doesn't give me anything target-wise, nothing really out of the backfield that way. So I kind of want to write him off as well. Sincere Bowers is the one, like you mentioned, that I probably want to target, but I don't want to target him now because it might just turn into a burnt asset come July and August once the season gets closer and we find out that it's someone else's role in this offense. So again, if I'm taking a back end running back, I want to try to hit on the one that's going to give me the most potential to give me the most value on those back end picks. And in this backfield, I just can't figure it out right now. Same with the wide receiver room. I know over the past couple of years, it's been the slot wide receiver that's been dominant for this room with Jawan Newton being the go-to guy for this offense. At least in the last 2 years, he was the main slot wide receiver, and then he was the boundary wide receiver before that. So even wide receiver wise, it's going to be hard to pinpoint which guy I want to take. And then touching on that with the quarterback, if Osborne isn't as efficient as a passer, I just might write off the wide receiver room as a whole. So for me, the fantasy payoff here probably starts at quarterback, especially if he does land on a true dual threat option like Osborne. So that is the battle that I want to follow the closest. And then right under that is the running back room, because like you mentioned, he does have a hankering for featuring some of these running backs, and we do end up getting a lot of fantasy points out of the running back room. But right now, I just can't put my finger on one.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the wide receiver position, Candle's not super hard to figure out. When he has a guy that he thinks is a dude, he'll feature him, right? I mean, Cody Thompson, Deontay Johnson back in the 2016, 2017 years, and then more recently, Juan Newton and Junior Vandeross III. He featured the guys that he thought were good. I don't know that he's got a dude. I don't think he's got a dude.
Quite a few, but he's had quite a few guys come over from Toledo as well. So it might be one of those guys, or it might be one of the guys that stuck around. But like as of right now, he just doesn't have a dude.
No, nobody that's obvious. I think if there's one guy I'm kind of keeping an eye on, it is Javon Brown, who is coming into his third year with this system. He had 2.51 yards per route run last year. Granted, that doesn't mean a ton when he had less than 200 yards last year, so a very limited sample size. But that's better than what guys like Ryder Treadway and Zamarian Lang coming in from Toledo have. You also got Emmanuel Ross. He's a former 4-star wide receiver from Syracuse, but he's also done nothing the last couple of years. So I think this is most likely a year where we're going to see it very spread out, and maybe a guy emerges in the second half of the season. Not a room I'm really targeting heavily as of right now. So,
yeah, agreed.
All right. Continuing on this train here, with Jason Candle leaving Toledo, we should probably talk about who's going to replace him there at Toledo, which is very interesting, like I said, because this is the first time Toledo's had to do this in almost a decade, but they landed on Mike Jacobs, the former head coach of Mercer, one of the few guys we're talking about today that's coming up from the FCS level. Chris, talk to us about Mike Jacobs here. What can we expect going forward from the former Bears head coach?
Yeah, Toledo imported more than a coach here. It imported some familiarity. Jacobs brought 14 Mercer transfers with him, at least on the offensive side, to Toledo. Two of the biggest names are CJ Miller and his number one wide receiver last year, Ajate Dabbs with him from Mercer as well. So those are two big add-ons, and that matters because this is not just a new staff teaching a new offense from scratch. So some of the most important skill players are already going to come into Toledo knowing the system. CJ Miller, the running back, probably gives you the clearest fantasy angle right away, and he's being drafted as so, at least in some of these early drafts. But Jacobs has shown, because he has shown willingness to feature a lead back. His running back one handled 57.1% of the running back rush share in 2024. And that number was 50.45% in 2025. So there's a good opportunity that Miller carries that workload going into Toledo. Miller, 1,400 rushing yards and 18 rushing touchdowns at Mercer. So again, the role with the familiarity worked greatly in Miller's favor. Dabbs is the cheaper passing game swing wide receiver in this offense. He had 851 receiving yards and 8 receiving touchdowns. If Toledo keeps enough of the passing volume it had last year, or at least that Mercer had last year, he can beat the cost that he's going at. Miller right now, early ADP, I believe, running back 89, and Dabbs is around wide receiver 102. So two potential great values, later in your drafts that you can have on your roster. For me, it's straightforward, Jared. Start with CJ Miller for the projected volume that we're expecting him to get, and treat Dabbs as a cheap familiarity-based upside bet for the Toledo offense.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that I've started taking Dabbs a little bit more recently, especially later in drafts, as a fun upside wide receiver option. Now, granted, you said he's the number one wide receiver, and you're correct in terms of production, but he's actually third in the team in targets last year.
Targets,
So,
yeah.
but obviously,
that's a good upside. Like, he's doing the most with what he's getting, right?
No, I certainly agree, right? And especially with Braden Smith and Adonis McDaniel not following Mike Jacobs here to Toledo. I can't remember if it's because they were out of eligibility or if they transferred somewhere else. But I think that there's a ton of upside there if he's the clear wide receiver one coming into this year. Because, again, if you look at the stats on the screen, like, this was a really good offense last year.
Yeah.
Like, if you were to translate their yards per game to the FBS, they would have been third in the country at 485 offensive yards per game. They would have been second in passing offense with 318.2 yards per game. Like, this is a very efficient system. Now, I don't know if that fully translates here to the MAC, but if there's a conference where it could translate, I think it's to the MAC, right?
Yep.
So with how good that passing offense was last year, one, I am interested in Dabbs as a potential number one wide receiver. Two, I'm kind of interested in John Allen Richt. I need to project him, but he is the quarterback that stayed behind compared to last year. Mike Jacobs didn't bring anybody with him from Mercer, from what I can tell. And so given how good of a passer, Braden Atkinson was last year, as well as a little bit of a rusher, I might need to double check it and see where I kind of project John Allen Richter after all that. So, but again, long story short as well, you're 100% right about CJ Miller. I keep pushing him up my rankings. I've got him up to running back 32 now. I
like it.
I think it's pretty darn clear that, like, he's gonna know this system. This is a conference where FCS guys come in all the time and they translate really, really well. Now add in a guy that's coming in with his coach and has proven that this coach loves him and is willing to reward him. I think he could be in for a really, really big season here, barring injury. So,
and that's the value you're getting with Miller. Like you said, you got him ranked RB 32, and right now he's going in the RB 80 range. So
Yep.
that's a tremendous draft value you can get with CJ Miller.
All right. Let us move on here to another one that you need us to walk through, or we need you to walk us through, Chris, and that is Ryan Beard, the former head coach of Missouri State, now the head coach of Coastal Carolina. Chris, what can we expect with Beard moving from Missouri State to Coastal Carolina here?
The move kind of almost gives us one of the clearest fantasy roadmaps in this whole group. The wide receiver, the slot wide receiver is the position you want to attack out of the wide receiver room. Over, speaking of his offensive coordinator as well, and Nick Petrino, over Petrino's last 3 seasons, the slot wide receiver averaged 82 targets per year. Now, there isn't a guy I can really identify right away as the guy that's going to be taking over the slot wide receiver role for Coastal Carolina. But if I had to put my finger on it right now, and a guy that I'm okay drafting, it's Robbie Washington. He stayed back at Coastal Carolina. He was the slot wide receiver last season. And if he lands that starting slot role, the value is obvious because his ADP right now is basically undrafted. And that then at the running back position, the usage is kind of clean too. Petrino has shown he likes to lean on one back over the last 3 seasons. The lead back handled 69% of the team's running back carries. Shamari Lawrence at Missouri State handled 75% of that share, nearly got 200 carries. So once the camp tells us who the running back one is going to be, that player deserves real attention for fantasy. And that is what makes this offense easier to approach than a lot of these other offenses that we talked about, who their wide receiver room is the guy that they think is going to ball out. It's not necessarily we're gonna feed the slot wide receiver, or we're gonna feed the boundary wide receiver. So we want the slot wide receiver in this offense, and that's the simple rule I'm going to use for attacking players on Coastal Carolina, and then I'm going to chase the lead back for the Chanticleers, Jared.
You mentioned Robbie Washington, and he is one of the names that I wrote down here as one of the slot wide receivers to target. But they also bring in Clayton Kopic, who comes in from Kennesaw State, who had a decent amount of production for the Owls last year. I think that I might go after him a little bit more just because there's a little bit more experience there, and as a guy that this team specifically brought in. I know some others might be eyeing, Tristan Gardner, who followed Beard and Petrino over from Missouri State. So again, if you go with your line of thinking there, Chris, of if it's a guy that they know is going to ball out, maybe they go that direction instead. He does play on the outside. That's, again, breaking the system a little bit there, but he was pretty solid for the Bears last year, 43 targets, 465 yards, and 6 touchdowns. I would say that's definitely a name to keep an eye on there. And the running backs, interesting as well, because you're 100% right about the fact they typically feature one guy. But much like Mora at Colorado State, I am wondering if the calculus changes here a little bit with the running back, mostly due to the fact that they bring a Deuce Bailey with them. Deuce Bailey was a freshman quarterback they had last year. He was their backup quarterback, and he seems to be a much more mobile quarterback than either Jordan Pacheco or Jacob Clark ever were. Now, Clark had a little bit of motion to him, right? But Deuce Bailey got 30 carries in 3 games last year for 101 yards, only 7 of which were scrambles. So this is a guy that this coaching staff is designing runs for. I don't think that stops with him, and I do expect him to be the starter. I know there's one other quarterback there that some people were kind of taking a look at, but this is a guy following Beard and Petrino over from Missouri.
Trevor Jackson from
Arkansas.
Gotcha.
Yep, that's who I was thinking of. I think Bailey will win this job. But when he wins this job, I'm curious to see how this actually plays out. We did get one start with Bailey last year in the game against Middle Tennessee. 31 pass attempts, 16 completions, 278 yards, and a touchdown. He also ran the ball 17 times for 43 yards and a touchdown. So A lot of rushing attempts, not a lot of rushing production, but we also have seen good rushing production in other games with a more limited sample size. I still think he will be a solid dual threat quarterback, but with him being a dual threat quarterback, I wonder if that hurts the likes of like a Dominic Nicely or a Rodney Hill, whichever running back you would be going after in this system. Do you have a preferred running back you would go after in this system? And do you kind of agree with my analysis with Bailey there, or do you think the running back's still going to be featured here?
Yeah. If Bailey takes the starting role, yeah, absolutely. Just like the Haney situation, it plays a role into what the running back is going to ultimately give us. If it's not Bailey, if I had to pinpoint a running back right now, again, it's just not something that I can do at this moment where I can be like, yeah, this is the guy that I want to take. It's been a running back room that I've avoided at all costs, Jared.
Gotcha. I personally would go after Dominic Nicely, mostly because Rodney Hill has had many, many years to do something, and he has had many, many years of not being able to do something, versus Nicely in his limited production last year, 68 attempts, 388 yards, and 3 touchdowns, almost 6 yards per carry. I'm willing to bet on the upside of him just out-talenting Hill.
Yeah, and some decent usage out of in the pass game as well.
Agreed.
For Nicely out last year. So yeah, okay.
All right. Let's move on to our second to last feature here, and that is Kirby Moore, the former offensive coordinator out of Missouri, headed over to be the head coach of Wazoo, Washington State. This is another guy that I've been waiting to get a head coaching job for quite a while. I'm kind of surprised he lasted 3 years at Missouri because, again, this is a offensive coordinator that a lot of us have been tabbing for a while now as one of the more creative in the industry. So what are we going to get out of him? He's headed over to Wazoo. You look at his quarterbacks the last couple of years, it's been real hit or miss, right? And mostly miss, if I'm being honest. Like Jake Haener, quarterback 83. Brady Cook was good his first year with Kirby Moore, with quarterback 24 in fantasy points per game there in 2023. And then followed it up the next year with QB 109 with Brady Cook, so I'm not exactly sure what happened there. I know some injury was involved in there as well, but still a steep drop-off. And then this past year, Bo Pribula, quarterback 75 in fantasy points per game, had his moments, but for the most part, relatively disappointing. So, yeah, all that to say, I'm not super stoked about going after the quarterback here. What I am super stoked about is going after the running back.
Yeah.
This is the golden goose of this offense, right? Ahmad Hardy, 257 carries. Nate Noel, even splitting the backfield with Marcus Carroll, still got 814 yards on 160 carries. The year before that, Cody Schrader, 277 carries and 14 touchdowns. The year before that, Jordan Mims back at Fresno State, 260 carries, 1,371 yards, and 18 touchdowns. When Moore has a guy, he is going to ride or die on that man. So the question becomes, who are the candidates to inherit this role?
Yeah. Who is it?
I'm personally pretty bought into Kirby Voorhees. He came over here with Jimmy Rogers and initially entered the portal to start this offseason, but elected or was convinced to stay by this new staff rather than following Rogers to Iowa State. I think that says a lot. His main competition is Leo Pulalasi, who last year had significantly less carries, significantly less yards than Voorhees last year, so I'm not too concerned about that. Moore didn't bring any running backs with him, which I thought was kind of interesting because there was a couple of Missouri running backs that transferred out this year. None of them followed Moore to Wazoo. So just by process of elimination, I'm just kind of arriving at the fact that Voorhees is probably the guy here. And if that's the case, that's a huge value in my opinion compared to where he's going at. Because let's see, Kirby is currently going as the RB 59 in drafts right now, and that is 13th round. Meanwhile, I've got him as RB 38.
Ooh, nice.
So I'm really big on Voorhees this year. If the running back, though, is the golden goose, wide receiver is the silver duck here, right? Not quite as good as golden goose, but you can still get some pretty good stuff out of here, right?
Still get some good eggs.
Kevin Coleman, last year, 84 targets, 732 yards, only 1 touchdown, which really killed his fantasy value. Otherwise, I think he would have finished better. Theo Weiss as the number 1 target the year before, 89 targets, 884 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Luther Burden the year before that was just an absolute masterpiece, 120 targets, 1,209 yards, and 9 touchdowns. And then the year before that, Jalen Cropper, 113 targets, 1,089 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Slot wide receiver after slot wide receiver has been peppered in this system. Theo Weiss being the only one to kind of break that trend there. And that had a lot to do with teams just double and triple covering Luther Bird in that final year, right? Problem is, it's pretty clear it's going to be the slot wide receiver. Problem is, we got 3 candidates here for who it could be.
Who's it going to be? Yeah.
Right? Tony Freeman, second in targets for Wazoo last year, played almost 80% slot snaps. I personally value experience quite a lot, so I personally, of the 3, would go with Freeman. He did hit the portal, but he is also listed on the 2026 spring roster, so even though there's not been an official announcement, it seems like that he is returning to Wazoo next year. And he was all right last year. 74 targets, 54 receptions, 590 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Not great, but I think there's something there. Meanwhile, if you're not like me and you like to go after, and you don't go after experience, but you like to go after talent and potential athletic plays, Tank Hawkins is your guy. Got some limited run at Florida, but like I said, this is the athletic play, the talent play. Star index of 70.7, easily the highest on the team. His speed score for us is 92.4, just a absolute burner. This, in my opinion, is kind of the upside play. Like I said, limited run at Florida, only 18 targets in 2 years. So that tells me there's a little something extra there that we're not entirely seeing, but you go with that. The third play is Daniel Blood. He follows over from Mizzou. Once again, like Hawkins, very limited playing time, only 24 targets in 3 years. So again, that tells me that there's probably not much there. In all 3 years, he only averaged about 10 yards per catch. So he's not even really doing that much with the limited opportunities that he gets. So I personally would definitely throw Blood out compared to the other 2. And the other 2, between Hawkins being the talent play and Freeman being the experience play, pick which one you'd rather go after based on your preferences for late shots at wide receiver. So, Chris, your thoughts on Kirby Moore in this system? What are you targeting here?
Yeah, it's a backfield first offense for me, and then the receiver conversation comes right after that. Like you hit on a lot of the talking points for what this offense is going to look like in 2026 under Kirby Moore, and it's Voorhees that, again, like you mentioned, Voorhees is the guy that you're going to want to have on your fantasy rosters in your running back room, and then I'm okay taking some shots. If you're in quite a few drafts and you want to expand your amount of shares of this wide receiver room, like you mentioned, you want to attack that slot wide receiver. Take Tony Freeman in a draft. Take Daniel Blood in another draft, and then go after Tank Hawkins as well. You're going to get all these guys at a decent value to round out your wide receiver room, and the potential for production is there depending on which one gets selected to be the guy for this offense. So you absolutely nailed it, Jared. Took the words right out of my mouth, brother.
Yeah, the only one who shows up in our ADP so far is Tank Hawkins. I know I've drafted Tony Freeman once or twice, but I drafted him like the last 3 rounds. Hawkins currently has an ADP about the 25th round. So like these are like I said, these are all guys you can grab at the very end of your draft. So, all right, let's hit on our last major guy we're going to highlight here today. So, Chris, talk to us about Casey Woods, the former SMU offensive coordinator, now the head coach of Missouri State, replacing Ryan Beard there. In addition to Casey Woods, he also brings in Mark Calla, who is the offensive coordinator at UTEP. Yep. How are you viewing these guys coming in, mixing together? Which system do you think is going to be more dominant here? How are you reading this?
I'm reading it as Mark Calla's system being more dominant over Casey Woods, and the key is the offensive relationship that he has already with the game reps behind it, with the quarterback that he brought in Skylar Locklear. If you look at what Skylar Locklear did at the back half of the season, and that kind of lines up with when Kala took over play calling duties for UTEP in that second half of the season. 7 regular season starts for Locklear last year. He averaged 192 passing yards, 1.7 passing touchdowns, 60 rushing yards, 1.1 rushing touchdowns, and 26.28 fantasy points per game through that time. He was a top producing quarterback for UTEP last year when he was called upon. And that came, like I mentioned, when Mark Kala took over the role as the play caller. So that is the kind of dual threat production profile CFF players want to identify early. And Locklear is kind of being drafted at a nice value right now in these early drafts. Woods gives the offense some credibility, so he's going to be involved with what they want to do moving the ball. But Kala and Locklear make it more believable right away. At wide receiver, Jamari Robinson is probably the name that I want to jot down early to remember. Both Woods and Kala have shown that they will feed one guy if they trust them in that wide receiver room. And Robinson, at least to me, has the best bet to become that player for me. But the name that matters the most here, Jared, is Skylar Locklear, because of the dual threat production with the coordinator familiarity, and it is exactly the kind of edge worth buying early, man.
I mean, I agree with you 100% that Locklear's a huge value right now. Again, QB 53 and ADP round 20, like late round 23 is where his average is going right now. I put it in my notes here that I've just been a dummy for not scooping up more of him, because I've got him at QB 28. That he should be an auto pick for me in like the 10th round every single time for me. But I keep trying to play the ADP game with him, and I keep losing. And it's only going to get worse for me, because again, we're talking about him now and letting people know like he should not be going as late as he is right now. Again, a top 10 quarterback in the second half of the season last year. Like, again, I don't think he'll quite be that, but like I said, my projections have him as a top 30 quarterback, and he's going far later than that. And he's not moving conferences either. Like, normally you're kind of worried with him transferring, like, oh, like he's moving up in competition. Is it going to translate? Like, no, this is still CUSA. They haven't gone very far, right?
Yep.
So I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I also agree with you that Jamari Robinson is the guy to target here. He's kind of been hard stuck at about 55, 60 targets the last 3 years, right? Yep. So you kind of worry about that. But compared to the rest of this room, he does kind of stand out. Again, 14.8 yards per catch last year, 1.82 yards per route run. Again, not mind-blowing, but much better than the other options on this team. And as you kind of discuss, with Kala and Woods both, when they feel like they have hashtag that guy, they will feed him. I think this might be Jamarie's final breakout season here in his senior year. They're going to go out with a bang with him. I like him a lot. I think I've got him wide receiver 43 for me this year.
Oh, so nice. You know, you have his ADP by any chance offhand?
I should find that real quick.
Because it's probably, like, it's got to be
wide receiver 74.
Yeah, so again, that's another
great value.
Another good value.
That one I have been scooping up. So I've not been a dummy on that one. So alrighty, let's go through these honorable mentions here. Chris, we got Billy Napier, a name I'm sure some people thought we're going to have in our top 10, but because of the fact that Napier's offense have been great for CFF, he's going to go in the offensive coordinators here, or in the honorable mentions here. We got Blake Anderson, who's being promoted from offensive coordinator to head coach of Southern Miss, as well as Alec Mortensen, who's in a similar boat where he's being promoted from the offensive coordinator of UAB to the head coach of UAB. You got Jordan Davis, the former offensive coordinator under North Texas, now becoming the offensive coordinator at East Carolina. We'll find out just how much of a big piece of the puzzle was he for those North Texas offense the last couple of years. And then we got Rick Bowie, who I mentioned at the start of the show. I didn't realize was moving on, but he's now the offensive coordinator at UTSA. The first time UTSA has actually gone outside of the program to make a new offensive coordinator hire. So that's definitely an interesting dynamic there. Where do I want to start here? I think I'll start with Blake Anderson. I think this is the one I really want to highlight here. And we've talked about all last season. Blake Anderson, wide receivers have been great. Again, 2023, Terrell Vaughn and Jalen Rose were great. 2022, Brian Cobbs was great, 116 targets for him. Devin Tompkins, the year before that, was a league winner. Jonathan Adams Jr. was phenomenal. Omar Bayless was great. Kirk Merritt was great. Like, year after year after year, Blake Anderson was beautiful for CFF wide receivers until last year. Last year was just a abject disaster at the wide receiver position. Just nobody really broke out between Elijah Metcalf, Carl Chester, Micah Davis, Braylon Brown, none of them, right? And here's the problem. All those guys are gone. Tyjon Chapman, wide receiver 5, also gone. As you mentioned earlier, Chris, he's at Memphis now. So we know Blake Anderson, wide receiver 1s, can be great. But, man, I've poured over this wide receiver roster 100 times, and I cannot tell you for the life of me, Chris, who could even be a candidate to be a Blake Anderson wide receiver 1, let alone who a favorite could be. Because you got Caden Saunders, a former 4-star wide recruit from Penn State, but he's done but nothing in college. You got Mario Sanders coming in from Illinois, and according to our C2C database, he has the highest star index among the wide receivers. So, again, maybe you're making a athletic play there potentially. You got Davis Dalton. That's their lead returning wide receiver from last year. A whopping 5 targets that he had. And then, like, it's gotten so bad that I'm legitimately looking at freshmen like Joshua Joseph or David Aboya and being like, maybe one of these guys can kind of emerge early, because, God, is there not much confidence I can really place in anybody else on this roster right now. So I want to say that we wait for spring camp reports, Chris, but Southern Miss is like notoriously bad about camp reports. So it's like, what do we do here?
Yeah. You sit on your hands and you wait. You don't draft any of them.
It really could just very well be you just have to wait until the season gets here.
Yeah. And if you want to throw a late round dart, if you want to fill out your wide receiver or running back room or quarterback room, and you think you can pinpoint the guy that is going to produce for you, I mean, sure, go for it. But I don't have the stomach for it. That's for sure.
All right. Any of these guys you want to highlight, Chris? You got any extensive thoughts on any of these guys?
You mentioned Jordan Davis. I think that's probably one of the more interesting ones, just because of the offense that UNT ran last year. And like you said, how much of that is he going to bring over to East Carolina? The passing game production is there. It's a lot of target concentration. We've seen that, but we're just not overly sure how much influence he had on that offense. Ashton Gray, I know a player that you've drafted quite a bit of. Yeah.
Yep,
Ashton Gray and Landon Sides, both coming over from UNT, should provide some at least early stability for what they want to do. But I mean, Jaquez Petaway was a guy that we drafted, when he first came on the scene at OU. That was a guy that there was a lot of hype built around. So I don't know what his role is going to be in this offense. So I'm kind of going to, again, it's another one of those rooms, at least wide receiver wise, where we're just going to have to wait to see how it all shakes out. And I hate how, we kind of get a little bit repetitive with that notion, is we just have to wait and see. But that's where we're at, talking about these situations, especially in February and March. And we're moving into spring camp season, spring practice. We're starting to see Arch Manning in a visor, and people think that's going to absolutely give him a little bit more juice because he has that visor. But we're rolling into news news and information season for college football as we move into spring training and getting into these spring games. So it's just for wide receiver wise, like Jared is drafting Landon Sides, take Landon Sides, and then I think a smash pick, at least in my opinion, is Ashton Gray in this running back room.
Yeah, people can get annoyed with us being repetitive, but the honest truth is, if we had a good feel about a lot of these rooms, we would be seeing these. Well, not only that, but like we'd be seeing them be drafted highly already, right? Like we're not the only experts in a lot of these drafts, and we got a lot of smart guys out there, like Mike Bainbridge, Josh Chevy, like guys like that, right? They've poured over these rooms as well, and I promise you, if they had a really good feel about any of these rooms, they'd be drafting a guy out of it, and they're not, and nobody really is right now, right? So again, I'll go after Landon Sides. It's been my boy for 2 years. He's following an offensive coordinator here, right? He plays outside, which is normally where we see the production in this offense. So I'll take that shot. But again, wide receiver 104 in ADP. It's a super cheap shot. Like, I'm not super confident in it by any stretch of the imagination. And where did I have him in my own personal rankings? I can't even remember. Let's see.
But there's good potential for value on the pick, right? So you'll take that.
And you mentioned like Ashton Gray, I definitely feel a little bit more confident in, like running back 50. They have they bring in Michael Allen from Marshall as well. He'll definitely be a factor. But man, Gray was so like people talk about Caleb Hawkins and they deserve to, but Ashton Gray was really good in his own right for that North Texas team last year. I think there's a reason why he didn't follow the rest of the team to Oklahoma State. I think he followed Josh Davis, East Carolina, because he saw an opportunity to say, I want to create my own legacy here and not just be stuck behind Hawkins my entire career. And I think he'll do well. I've got him projected pretty highly here. So, all right. That's all we got. What was that?
So I dig it.
All right. We got 3 more honorable mentions I'll throw out here real quick, and that is Bodie Reeder, who is replacing Rick Bowie at Western Kentucky. He's the former offensive coordinator at Middle Tennessee State. Another air raid guy. Makes sense. That's what Western Kentucky has been and will continue to do. We also got Anthony Scelfo, who is replacing Bodie Reeder at Middle Tennessee State. He comes up from Southeast Louisiana. And then the last guy I have listed here is Jesse Montalto, the former offensive coordinator out of Iowa Central Community College. And you might be sitting here thinking, Jared, why are we going to talk about this guy? Well, he's going to be the offensive coordinator at UL Monroe and is taking over play calling from Bryant Vincent. So this is a system in Bryant Vincent where we know for the most part we want the Bryant Vincent RB1, right? We've seen it over and over again. They can be league winners for CFF. But in terms of predicting who that's going to be, it's been an absolute crapshoot the last couple of years. And he just straight up lies on his depth charts. So it's already been hard enough to predict who that's going to be. Now we got a new guy calling plays. And based on what I saw at Central Iowa, again, take it with a grain of salt, but Montalto didn't really do much of a workhorse back system over there. So there's just a lot of uncertainty now with UL Monroe. And to me, it just makes all the sense in the world. Kind of like the Southern Miss wide receiver situation. We may not know until the actual season starts. And you just got to be quick with your waiver wire picks at that point. I know you can't do that with best ball, but that's just the honest truth of what I'm seeing here at UL Monroe. Just may not even really be worth it. Now, Anthony Scelfo, the offensive coordinator at Middle Tennessee, formerly of Southeast Louisiana. I'm interested here because at first I was like, okay, yeah, they hired a new offensive coordinator. But then there's a reunion going on here that I was kind of shocked by. And I'm surprised I didn't put this 2 and 2 together earlier. But Antonio Martin comes in to Middle Tennessee after a brief stint at Kansas State where he was solid, right? He's averaging over 6 yards per carry, but he wasn't anywhere near like a true contributor for the Wildcats. He reunites here with Scelfo, and the last time these two were together, Antonio Martin had, 233 carries, 1,230 yards, and 11 touchdowns on the ground. He also had 17 catches for 75 yards. not great receiving numbers, but still
Yeah,
a
take it.
lot of production, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking that we could have a bounce back season for Antonio Martin here. I think that this is a really solid reunion that's kind of flown under the radar for a lot of people. And when I plugged in my projections for Antonio Martin, once I did all that, looking at RB 46 right now in my rankings. Is that your thoughts, Chris?
Yeah. No, I've been taking Antonio Martin kind of late, and I've liked the value that I've been able to get on him. And after this episode, of course, he's gonna shoot up a little bit
Of course.
because that's the Jared effect that we got on chasing the Natty. But
Hey, this is a Jared and Chris effect now, man. You're part of this.
I've seen LJ Phillips go top 10 rounds quite a bit.
You
now,
have.
man.
I
So
get that.
kinda,
That's you, man. That's you.
yeah. So I kind of, well, it's him too. Him too. I mean, he's a dog, but yeah, I like the Antonio Martin call. As for ULM, it's going to be hard to, at least for me, at early to pinpoint who I want to touch. But I just wanted to touch on Bodie Reader going to Western Kentucky.
Please do.
Sorry.
I said, please do.
Oh, okay. I thought you said Wazoo, and I was like, "Whoa, wait a second."
Yeah,
and it's just the fact that over his past 2 years at Middle Tennessee, it's been the slot wide receiver that has gotten the bulk of the target share for his offenses. And at Western Kentucky, at least right now, if I'm not mistaken, Jared, that's KD Hutchinson's role.
That is.
And he's also hyper targeted a tight end that tends to line up in the slot as well. We've seen Tipton 2024 be the receiving leader, the target leader for Middle Tennessee, and then going back to last year, he ran a high amount of snaps in the slot. I don't have a guy in that Western Kentucky room right now that I'm like, okay, this is the guy that I want. But as soon as that guy gets identified, that's where I'm going to take some late round value at the tight end position. Because if you hit on a late round tight end and you can get a tight end that can carry your tight end room to 8 to 12 points per week, you got some steady production there at the position. And the fact that his main tight ends run a high volume, at least at Middle Tennessee for the 2 years that he was there with Tipton, runs a high volume amount of snaps out of the slot. There's potential there for a tight end who's primarily used as a wide receiver. So slot wide receiver and tight end that's used primarily in the passing game is the positions that you want to attack for Reader at Western Kentucky.
All righty. I appreciate those call-outs, actually. Yeah. It makes me realize I think I still have KD Hutchinson's system stats for my projections still just with Western Kentucky. I might need to rethink those and put those in for Bodie Reader here at Middle Tennessee State, see if that positively impacts him or not. Because I think I have Hutchinson at, let's see, wide receiver 45 right now. Could very well see that getting him a nice little bump up there. I did just draft him in my in one of the best balls that I'm in right now as my last pick.
Oh, nice.
So I was happy to get a share of that because I do think Hutchinson will be the clear wide receiver one. Well, not the clear wide receiver one, but like,
the top target getter.
He could. Because I've been high on Rockwell as well, right? But like Hutchinson's got the value, or he's got the experience in that system the last couple of years, and quite frankly, the staff really does seem to like him. So I'm happy to get a share of him as well. So.
Yep.
Alrighty, Chris, long show. Appreciate your patience as we get through a lot of information here, but it was a lot of good information. Hopefully, a lot of you guys are shaking up your rankings a little bit, learning about a lot of these guys here. So, any final thoughts, Chris, before we get out of here?
Yeah, I said it last week and I'll say it again. The supplemental freshman guide is live. You don't have to pre-order it. Make sure you head over to campus2canton.com and grab your copy. The fellows work tremendously hard on getting that out to you guys. So make sure you go and get a leg up on the rest of your league by getting that guide.
Oh, yeah. Again, for my research purposes for CFF Dynasty, as well as the few C2C leagues I'm in, it's the first place that I go when learning about freshmen. I legitimately don't even go to like 247 or On3 and their rankings first. I always go check out to see what our guys have to say first. So it's a one of a kind product. You got to go check it out. It's only $20, and it's $20 that could legitimately give you such a leg up over so many other people in your league. So,
yep, agreed.
With that, we have come to the end of our show. Appreciate all of you guys for listening out there. If you have not already, make sure you leave a like, a comment, and subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're on the podcast side of things, just follow the show. Leave a 5-star review wherever you can. Make sure you check out the rest of the Campus to Canton podcast network for shows ranging on pretty much anything you can think of related to the college fantasy game. And we'll see you guys back here next Monday. And I don't think we've chosen a topic for next week yet, Chris. This will be fun. Ooh. This is the first time I think we come into this off season and there wasn't a pre-planned show. So we'll come up with something crazy for y'all next week. Until then, really appreciate you guys. Hope y'all have a wonderful and blessed week. See y'all.